Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Lee. Last Sunday afternoon in the IndyCar Series season finale at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, a 15-car crash claimed the life of two-time and current Indianapolis 500 champion Dan Wheldon. Funeral services for the 33-year-old native of Emberton, England, were held yesterday in his adopted American hometown of St. Petersburg, Florida. Today, here at Conseco Fieldhouse in Indianapolis, home to many in the IndyCar community, while we still mourn, we will also celebrate the life of a friend, colleague, husband, father, son, and brother, and recognize his accomplishments, which included 16 IndyCar wins and a season championship, and his off-track charisma, charm, playfulness, and ability to make everyone he came in contact with feel important. Dan Wheldon, forever a champion.
It will be Dan Wheldon winning the 89th Indy 500 as an Englishman. Will roll into victory lane at the world's greatest race course for the first time in 4 decades.
Guys, I'm not emotional, but I'm crying. I can't believe I've just won the Indianapolis 500.
This has been a dream come true for me. I've loved the Indianapolis 500 ever since I've been a young kid. You know, there's the best drivers in the world here, the best teams in the world, and I'm having an emotional moment. I'm just so proud.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. I'm Bob Jenkins from Versus.
And I'm Marty Reed from ESPN, and we're here today to remember and celebrate the life of Daniel Clive Wheldon.
As you all know, Dan was more than a race car driver, more than an Indianapolis 500 champion, more than the charismatic ambassador for the sport of IndyCar racing.
Over the next hour, former teammates, bosses, and friends will reflect on Dan's life and the impact he made on and off the track. We'd like to take a moment to thank Rick Fusen and everyone from Conseco Fieldhouse and the Indiana Pacers for their help with today's memorial service. It would be proper now to begin with a prayer. Please welcome Bob Hills from IndyCar Ministries.
It's been said it takes a minute to find a special friend, an hour to appreciate them, a day to love them, and then an entire lifetime to forget them. The Apostle Paul's words recorded in the Bible say, "For I'm already being poured out like a drink offering, and my time of departure is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I've kept the faith. Now there is in store for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing." Would you pray with me? Loving Heavenly Father, we gather to thank you for the life of Dan Wheldon. Even though we miss him and feel a great loss, we desire to celebrate his life today. Please place your arms around Susie, Sebastian, Oliver, and their family, as well as all of us, as we journey through the days ahead. As you help Dan show us a smile when we needed one, give us a Dan Wheldon smile to share with others. I pray this in your holy and precious name. Amen. Dan received a friend today in heaven. Iron Man, Michael Wanzer. Godspeed, Daniel Clive Wheldon and Iron Man Mike.
Please welcome the CEO of IndyCar, Mr. Randy Bernard.
Good afternoon. We've all been devastated by the terrible accident that took Dan Wheldon's life. He was a great champion and a friend to so many of us. We thank everyone who is here to participate in this memorial service, and thank all of you for attending. Today we mourn Dan's loss, but also celebrate his life. We honor him for who he was. This turnout is a wonderful tribute in itself to Dan, and a reminder to all of us that a single life, well lived, can make a difference to so many other people. Certainly that was true of Dan. Not far from here at the Brickyard, Dan Wheldon made his permanent mark in racing. Though he was still a young man, his 2 Indy 500 championships had already given him a place in the history of our great sport. But I suppose it will always feel like an incomplete history. Who knows how many more checkered flags or how many victory laps he would have taken, how many more trophies he'd have held over his head. Yet as we commemorate his life today, it's not his successes on the track that we celebrate, or his unrealized potential that we mourn. Rather, it's the person that Dan was that brings us all together. The victories and the accolades, they didn't define him. His strong character, his enthusiastic approach to life, and the love of family, friends, and fans did. There was a reason he was a fan favorite. I'd see him go out of his way to shake a serviceman's hand, or sign a young man's autograph, or do that extra interview, or just joke around with the drivers. Dan loved life, and it always showed. To his wife, Susie, and his sons, Oliver and Sebastian, we share your grief. Our prayers and our thoughts are with you. We offer you the knowledge that Dan was indeed an extraordinary man, one who will be missed by all who knew him personally, and many who watched him from afar as a sterling example of the best our sport has to offer. We at IndyCar, Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and the Holman George family were especially honored that we were able to organize this today. The outpouring of emotion and desire to reach out to the family has been tremendous. We are humbled to be able to provide the opportunity for race fans and the public to pay their respects and offer support. There's a great community surrounding racing, but it's more than a community. It's a family, and I'm confident that family will be there to support Dan's family for many, many years to come. There are risks in racing, and Dan knew them all. He was committed, like all the best drivers in the world, to pushing the boundaries of human performance, endurance, and concentration. Those are goals as noble and ancient as mankind itself. He passionately loved racing and its challenges it offered. His spirit, his energy, and the skills were perfect for IndyCar, and we were proud that he devoted his career to competing in our great sport. The car you see here today is a car that Dan was testing this year. It has many cutting-edge enhancements that promise to move the sport of racing and automotive engineering forward. And yes, it is designed with additional safety features. It wasn't surprising that Dan was involved. His commitment to improving and advancing every aspect of our sport was well known. The innovations that emerge from those efforts can have repercussions not just on racetracks, but on highways and in our passenger cars. Just another measure of the impact that Dan had on our lives and IndyCar. Well, today we're here all about Dan and what he meant to so many. In this field, especially one as competitive as racing, that earning the respect and admiration of one's peers is a tremendous accomplishment. And now we must honor his memory by doing the right things. He would want the drivers and the teams and the series to unite and to work together. He'd want us to strive to make our sport safer. So we should pledge to protect and improve racing, the sport he loved. It's what he would want us to do. So we are here to say goodbye to Dan Wheldon. There's no doubt he was a great driver. Yet with even greater certainty, we can say he was a great man, as measured by the impact he has had on every one of us. I'd like to close with a special thought I once read. Perhaps there are not really stars in the sky, Perhaps there are openings in the heavens where a loved one shine down to let us know they're happy. That is how I want to remember Dan. Always happy, always smiling, and always shining down upon us.
Ladies and gentlemen, Grammy Award winner, Miss Reba McEntire.
If I had only known it was our last walk in the rain, I'd keep you out for hours in the storm, and I would hold your hand like a lifeline to my heart. Underneath the thunder we'd be warm. If I had only known it was our last walk in the rain. If I had only known I'd never hear your voice again, I'd memorize each thing you ever said, and on those lonely nights I would think of them once more and keep your words alive inside my head. If I had only known I'd never hear your voice again. You were the treasure in my hand. You were the one who always stood beside me. So unaware, I foolishly believed that you would always be there. And then there came the day when I turned my head and you slipped away. If I had only known it was my last night by your side, I'd pray a miracle to stop the dawn. And when you smiled at me, I would look into your eyes and make sure you know my love for you goes on and on. If I had only known, oh, if I had only known, oh, the love I would have shown. If I had only known.
He hits the wall coming out of 4. Will he have enough to cross the yard of bricks? Who will win? Who is the winner? Just like that, Dan Wheldon grabs the victory. Incredible. Dan Wheldon.
An amazing day, an amazing day. I love the Indianapolis 500. I love everything about it. And I'm so glad to be drinking milk again and to be a two-time winner. Vince just didn't want to give up.
Now here is the president and CEO of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Corporation, Mr. Jeff Belskis.
Dan Wheldon meant much to all of us here today, and we know what a special person he was. He enriched our lives and the lives of those around him, both in public and in private. He was a giant in our sport, a two-time Indianapolis 500-mile race winner, an IndyCar Series champion. He was known the world over for his racing accomplishments, and in many ways became an institution in his own right. I also know what great respect Dan had for the Hallman George family and for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He loved the Indianapolis 500-mile race, and he told everyone so every chance he had. Consider this. Of the over 730 drivers to have competed in the Indianapolis 500-mile race, only 18 have been good enough to win it more than once. Even a fewer number can say they've won it more than once and finished second twice. Yes, Dan knew how to finish and finish strong at Indianapolis. But it wasn't just his ability to be successful on the track at Indianapolis that captured the attention of the Indianapolis 500-mile race fans. Dan endeared himself to the Indianapolis 500 fans because he embraced and lived out the spirit of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and the Indianapolis 500. He loved its traditions, he loved its history, and he loved its fans. But it was the Dan Wheldon flair, his own personal, it's just me being me, baby, his stamp on those traditions that our fans will always remember. Two great examples were seen at this past year's race. Just drinking the milk wasn't good enough for Dan. He loved so much what that milk represented, winning the greatest spectacle in racing. He loved it so much that he showered the milk on himself. And getting on his knees and gently kissing the bricks wasn't enough for Dan. No, Dan laid across the century-old finish line to get as close as he could to the 100 years of history and looked to the sky and shook his fists and legs in glory. Yes, Dan Wheldon loved and respected the traditions of Indianapolis, but his passion and understanding for what our traditions mean allowed him to take them one step further, and our fans loved that about Dan Wheldon. Dan indeed was an immensely strong character who had his own unique style and natural grace. Dan could see the funny side of life and help us all to laugh about it. He also took time for everyone and helped everyone around him to feel special. Above all, Dan understood the racing character, and his heart belonged to the sport he loved, the sport in which he was a champion several times over and in several ways. I also know what Dan meant to his family, and in particular to his wife, Susie. He was a loving husband and a very proud father. And for me, Dan meant much also. In addition to being a fantastic ambassador and a great spokesperson for the Indianapolis 500 and for all of IndyCar racing, he was a friend. I'm privileged to have called him my friend. Dan's departure has left a deep void in our lives, but thank God, we're all the richer for having known him and having watched him race.
Please welcome to the stage the Academy of Country Music Awards top new artist, the band Perry.
Go rest high
It's now time to hear from Dan's longtime managers, Mickey Ryan and Adrian Sussman.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Adrian.
And I'm Mickey. Before we begin, we'd just like to send our heartfelt condolences to the Wanzer family for their loss today.
Apart from being Dan's management for more than 11 years, we were also dear friends, not only with Dan, but with his entire family. And speaking of the family, we've been asked to take this opportunity to thank everyone on behalf of Susie, the boys, Dan's parents, Clive and Sue, his brothers, Austin, Ashley and Elliot, and his sister, Holly. They'd like you to know how much they appreciate the amazing outpouring of sympathy, flowers, gifts, and notes of condolences. It's been a great comfort for them to know that there are so many others that share in their grief.
We were truly blessed to work with Dan, and it was a privilege for us to witness a young, carefree racer blossom into a true champion and a devoted family man. Probably the best way to give you a quick insight into how he grew over the years is to contrast his 2 Indianapolis 500 wins. Personally, what I remember most about Dan's 2005 Indy 500 win was how much fun we had together that night. I don't know if I remember, but it was mega, man, as he would say. Once Dan tasted the milk in Victory Lane and poured the rest of it on his head, it was then time for the Jim Beam bottle to make the rounds. And that pretty much set the precedent for how the celebration would unfold that evening. He finished his media interviews and descended upon downtown Indianapolis looking to go big, Thunder. Like any 26-year-old, he just won the 500 would. We partied with Dan, his friends, and his sponsors until 4 in the morning, capping an amazing day with a cheeseburger and greasy fries at Steak and Shake. The only problem with this whole story was that Dan was due back at the Speedway at 6 a.m. for a satellite media hit with the folks at Good Morning America. Still feeling a bit tipsy, and with one foot still in his bed, Dan nailed the interview the way he always did. But shortly thereafter, it was time for a block of radio interviews with various stations across the country. In a conference room at the Speedway, Dan called into a radio station and was asked to hold for a couple minutes while they came back from a commercial break. Welcome back, KNST AM Sports Radio. This is Howie in the Morning. We're really excited to have a special guest with us this morning. Please welcome 2005 Indianapolis 500 winner, Dan Wheldon. Dan, tell us about that thrilling victory at the Brickyard yesterday. Dan? Dan? Hello? Well, it looks like we've lost Dan. We'll see if we can get him back on the line. In the meantime, let's check in with Monty, standing by with Sunday's baseball scores. Of course, Dan had fallen fast asleep on the conference room table.
The 2011 Indy win was entirely different. It was all about the family. He said that both wins were equally satisfying, but the second was even more emotional, as he was able to dedicate it to his beloved mother Sue, at home battling with Alzheimer's disease. And also because his sons Sebastian and Oliver were there with Susie to witness this proud moment. He recently told me that the reason he had to win a second Indy 500 was because he simply had to have a trophy and a pace car for each of his boys. But that day, we also witnessed a classic piece of D-Dub, never wanting to miss an opportunity for his family. During his emotional speech on national television in Victory Lane, tears in his eyes and voice wavering, Dan somehow spontaneously uttered the magic words, "I'm gonna take my kids to Disney." And sure enough, the next day I received a call from a top Disney executive inviting his family to an all-expenses-paid VIP trip to Disney World. While Dan would evolve as a driver and person throughout his career, some things never changed.
All week, we've shared a lot of funny stories remembering Dan and his contagious personality. One thing that seemed to amuse so many of us was his obsession with neatness and for making sure that everything was in its place. He was definitely a neat freak. Now, I didn't spend a lot of time in Dan's closet, but I can tell you that it didn't look like mine, or anyone else's for that matter. Dan was the only guy I knew with 200 pairs of shoes. I guess you could call him the Imelda Marcos of race car drivers. He had dozens of brand new Pumas still in their boxes and stacked high in the corner. And for those Pumas that actually made their way out of the box, they were 10 deep on the floor, perfect rows, all with laces lined up and facing forward. It looked like there was a communist country's military shoe parade crossing his closet floor. But probably the funniest story I heard this week was when Dan and Susie were out visiting friends in Colorado. One morning, their friend Lane opened the dishwasher to find one sparkling clean fork in the utensil basket and nothing else. Dan, did you actually turn on the dishwasher to clean just one fork? To which Dan answered, hell yeah, and I would have turned it on without the fork just to clean the inside of the dishwasher.
For Dan, a cell phone wasn't just a communication device. It was his main form of entertainment. I'll never forget the expression on our receptionist's face as she came to my office explaining there was a strange man on hold, insisting he'd paid the money and he wanted to know when he could pick up the good stuff. It was, of course, one of Dan's endless prank calls, and I got pretty good at spotting them. One day, I was at my parents' house, and my mum called from downstairs. Abe, there's a call for you. It's Jerry Maguire. And I was like, okay, I know what's going on here. So I picked up the phone, and I said, what the? Beep. What do you want to do, you? Beep, beep, beep. And of course, on the line was an actual Irish bank manager called Jerry Maguire. I told Dan this story, and he got a real kick out of the fact that he'd managed to get me, even when he wasn't getting me. We had such great times with you, Dan, and it was just an honor to represent you and be your friend. You made us all better, and we'll miss you more than words can express.
Susie, we love you. Please know that we will always look after you and the boys, and we will always take care of them. And I will personally see to it that Sebastian and Oliver get a comprehensive education on how to organize their Puma closet. Rest in peace, Dan. We love you, and we will hold you in our hearts forever.
Here is one of Dan's closest friends in the paddock, the public relations director for Panther Racing, Mike Kitchell.
On the rare times that I had to do public speaking during our time at Panther together, Dan would spend the entire day telling me how great a job I was going to do. And then right before I'd come on stage, he'd go, bro, 2 things. Don't screw up, and your fly's undone. Go. But I want to thank the family very much for giving me this opportunity to be up here. It's obviously an honor to be associated with Dan and his career, and obviously Susie and the boys, and to be able to see Dan grow the way he did was quite remarkable. And I brought up 2 of my closest friends, Benito Santos and Misty Gibbs. For the 2 years that Dan was at Panther, the 3 of us plus Dan and Susie are pretty much inseparable. And much like Adrian and Mickey explained, we had a little phone game of our own. Dan was notorious for stealing our phones. And when he would steal our phones, he would effectively text message everyone in our contact list. And it was everything. We would agree to lunches, agree to meetings. And in Benito's case, do you want to tell them what he would do when he stole your phone?
just text random guys saying, hey, you look good today. Hey, you're cute. I want to see you.
It's true. But we would also conspire to steal one another's phones, and I think one of our fondest things to do when we were stealing phones was to steal Misty's phone and give guys the wrong idea. I think the first of such instances happened with Charles Burns, our beloved security chief at IndyCar, and I think Misty would like to tell you what Dan sent to Charles.
Yes, Dan decided to take my phone and text to Charles Burns, who I had hardly met, maybe met once, that sometimes I lie awake at night thinking of your big, strong hands. So, of course, since this was the first time this had happened to me, the text messaging and stealing phones, when I saw Charles the next day and he said, hey, that really kicked it off. And I actually have my phone in my pocket right now because I still never go anywhere without it.
But our favorite instance of the phone stealing game, as we called it, came. We were at dinner one night, and my wife Carmen joined us, and I went off to the bathroom, and Dan somehow got my phone. I have no idea how. And Dan sent Carmen a message while I was in the bathroom, and it was something along the lines of, baby, you look so hot tonight, I'd like to blank, 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 blank. And he waited for a minute, and she didn't get the text, so he thought he'd send her another one. Hey, sweetie, you look so great tonight. Why don't we go to specific place? And blank, 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 blank. Well, I'd finally come back to the dinner table, and Carmen hadn't seen the messages yet. And Dan couldn't handle it. He was like, Carmen, did you get the messages? And while my wife, Carmen, was looking to find where these mystery text messages have gone, I got a pretty awkward phone call from my brother-in-law, Cameron. And Cameron wasn't buying the whole, my race car driver friend Dan sent you those messages. I actually hope he's watching this so he'll finally believe that it was Dan that sent those text messages. But turning a little bit serious, guys, and in closing, you know, we talk a lot about what our sport needs to grow and what changes we need to make to the Indianapolis 500 down the street to continue to make it the greatest sporting event in the world. And, you know, I don't know if our cars need to look like Delaras or Delta Wings. And I don't know. I'm certainly not smart enough to tell you guys where we need to race, but I know the one thing we control is ourselves and the type of people that we are. And if we could somehow capture 1/10 of the millions and millions of things that made Dan Wheldon great, being courteous, compassionate, never too busy to stop and speak with a fan, and able to recognize that every once in a while you have a small window to make a positive difference in somebody's life, or just to make somebody feel special. I think if we could all do that we could take the sport wherever we wanted. But there's one catch with that. No matter how much we want to be like Dan, no matter how much he inspires us, and no matter how many drivers come along and try to emulate him, there's only one Dan Wheldon. And we love you, bro.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Managing Director for Chip Ganassi Racing, Mr. Mike Hull.
When Susie asked me to speak today, saying yes was a given. But having the strength to stand up here and do this is very, very difficult. You know, with Dan, This last week for me, I've had a little bit of an issue medically, and I'm having a tough time seeing. So even with the teleprompter, I may have a problem. But I know that's on purpose. I know Dan did that just to stick the needle in really, really well, because what he's done here is he's taken a race guy, made him with one eye try to be a speechwriter, and then follow that up by actually speaking about him. So I know what happened. I'm waiting this morning, and I'm waiting for the text from Dan. I'm waiting for this text that says, "Hey, MH, I know you're going to talk about me today, so whatever you do, you got to make me look good." That was Dan Wheldon. And Dan, you know, in this case, I'm going to try to make you look good. Under normal circumstances, we'd take you apart. Dan Wheldon was all about engagement. His belief is that life was better when it was shared with each other. That was Dan Wheldon's ethic. His unique ability to get everybody in the room engaged made all of us better. Everyone is here today for various reasons. You know, it could have been somebody, excuse me, up there in that upper area. Unfortunately, you're up there, I'm sorry, that just got an autograph. It could be somebody that just enjoyed the fact that Dan Wheldon did something better than most anybody can ever do, drive an Indy car. It could have been a sponsor. It could be a kid that he visited in a hospital. It could be somebody in the first few rows here that have been friends for life. His sphere of engagement had long tentacles. That was very evidenced by the global outpouring that we saw this week. His brand was clearly engaged integrity. Susie asked me to talk about the time that we spent together at Chip Ganassi Racing and speak to Dan Wheldon. So it'll go something like this. In 2008, in January of 2008, our first race experience with Dan Wheldon was at the 24 Hours of Daytona. It wasn't an open-wheel race. He was paired with two Target teammates. One was a guy named Casey Mears, whose only experience in endurance racing was driving an off-road truck from Ensenada to La Paz. His other teammate was a guy named Scott Dixon, who relishes driving at Daytona, and you can't pry him out of the car. And we have Dan Wheldon, who is the superstar guy that couldn't road race worth a lick. He'd grown up in intermediate formula cars on road racing, but you know, he learned his craft in big cars that turn left. So it was an interesting situation. And on top of that, the car itself was being maintained by a bunch of IndyCar guys. An endurance race for an IndyCar mechanic or an IndyCar crew member is the 4 hours between the time Jim Neighbors sings and you drink the milk. That's it. That's an endurance race for us. So you got IndyCar guys doing this thing. We're racing Daytona. The race starts. Dixon does what he loves to do. He gets out and he's leading. He's going. Casey Mears climbs in after Dixon's double stint, so he's in the car for 2 stints, and Dan's next. Dan's like the anchor guy now. So he jumps in the car and off he goes. I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be great. Everything's okay. Indy 500 winner, you know, Dan Wheldon, we're doing okay. And our timing stand, in a way, was maybe kind of like the Starship Enterprise conning tower, the con, right before the Romulans got ready to attack. Because it's really quiet, everybody's happy, there's nothing going on. All of a sudden, in my headset, we've got the spotter, we got the car, and then we've got this thing called an intercom, so everybody can talk to each other whenever they want to, without invitation. And the next thing I know, Shaggy, who is our Toyota TRD engine guy, he's screaming at the top of his lungs, "You got to get Wheldon to stop over-revving the motor. He's over-revving on the upshifts. He's over-revving on the downshifts. What's he going to do? We're only going to be in the race for an hour. He's already way, way past where he needs to be with the revs." Okay. Grant Weaver, who looks after our transmissions, is in the back of the stand, and he's watching what's going on with the screens, and he jumps up in my face, and he says, "If Wheldon keeps missing shifts like that, the whole gear carrier is going to be against the magnets in the bottom of the gearbox. We're not going to finish the race." Simmons, the engineer, is yelling and screaming, he cannot continue to use the engine and gearbox like a Jake brake. And at the same time, the spotter now, you got to understand there were 28 prototype cars and 48 GT cars. This is a big field. The spotter is yelling, Harner, he's yelling at Dan, and he's saying, you've got to stop using GT cars as apexes. So I'm taking all this in a nanosecond, trying to think, now what am I supposed to do? This is Dan Wheldon, the Indy 500 champion. We signed this guy to drive for us. He's got to know how to drive one of these cars. Am I supposed to teach him how to drive on the radio in the next hour? Doesn't he realize we've got 18 hours to go? So I get on the radio, I'm watching the screen, watching where he's at on the racetrack, watching the data, listen to these guys yell in my ear. Now I'm teaching Dan Wheldon how to drive a race car on the radio. Amazing. After about 55 minutes of this, Dan starts to figure it out. So now we have like the Christians and the Lions going on the timing stand. Simply, it's either thumbs up or thumbs down. Are we leaving him in for another stint? Or are we putting Dixon back in? So it was kind of a divided vote. I made the decision to leave him in. And he stayed in for another stint. By the middle of the next stint, he was doing okay. He was actually holding his own. He was running well. Everything was okay. He gets out of the car. Dixon gets in and off he goes. So Dan jumps up on the stand, and I think he starts to tell us about the car. Oh, the balance of the car is this. If we just did a little bit of that, it'd be better. Well, he didn't realize how Chip Ganassi Racing actually works. He was attacked by the guy that does the brakes, the guy that does the body work, the guy that does the tires, the TRD guy that looks after the engines. Simmons and I had to step back. These guys are taking him apart because they took ownership in the product, and he was beating it up pretty good on a racetrack. So he steps off the stand, and the next guy in his face is the owner. Now, the owner uses very short sentences, and they're adjective-filled. I won't repeat what was said there because I know we have a G-rated audience. But Dan fully understood that if he came back to drive the next stint, he'd better do a good job, because that's what drivers at Chip Ganassi Racing actually do for each other. So off he went. He did get in the car again. He did a great job, and never will forget. It was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and Casey was driving the car. In fact, he was doing a great job. He was learning depth perception in the dark, following his teammate Max Pappas. And for anybody that ever wants to see how you win the 24 hours of Daytona, that's what you want to watch. You want to watch that portion of the race. That's when you gain track position. That's when you win. And Casey's out there pounding around, and he's doing an awesome job. And suddenly in the dark on our left, up on the stand, pops Dan Wheldon. I thought, man, that's odd. He's not supposed to be back out here till about 7:30. I said, Dan, what are you doing? You're supposed to be sleeping. And he says, sleep's overrated. He says, I've decided I need to be out here so I can learn as much as I can so I can be productive when I get back in the car at 7:30. I said, man, you need your sleep. He says, no, I'm here with you. I'm going to help you. He says, whatever you need, I'll do it for you. And I'd heard all these stories about Dan, and I'd heard all the stories about the needle, and I'd heard all the stories about how he put you on. So I'm looking at him right square in the eye, and I'm trying to figure out, did this guy just set his alarm clock to get up to screw with me? Or is he serious? So I dropped the headset off my head, and I looked at him square in the eye, and I said, Dan, I'll tell you what, if you really want to help us, here's what you can do. Believe it or not, we're freezing our asses off up here on this timing stand. We don't have any heat to keep us warm. If you could go off somewhere and find an electric blanket and a long extension cord, that would really help us. And the second thing is, I don't know what happened back there at hospitality, but the chef must have fallen asleep because we haven't had anything warm or hot to eat for about 4 hours up here. We're starving. And he looked at me. I remember it was January 29th, 4 o'clock in the morning. That started my relationship right there with Dan Wheldon. He split. Didn't say anything, left. Jumped off the stand and left. Simmons says to me, where do you think he went? I said he either went back to his coach to sleep until 7 o'clock or he's going to be back with food. About 30 minutes later, he comes back looking like a buttoned-up guy from St. Elmo's. He then proceeded to go around to every crew member who was sitting in chairs trying to sleep now. He's waking them up because they don't have to get up for another 45 minutes to service the car, and he's telling them what a great job they're doing, whatever they need. He's there for them. This guy was all about engagement. He wanted to engage everybody in the process. That's what he did. One of the greatest things was this group of IndyCar guys that were given absolutely no chance to win that race won the race. We won with a race with a guy that could only turn left, a guy that only drove in Mexico for endurance racing, and a race driver, a quality guy that knows how to get it done on a road track. We won the race. A few days later, Dan came to the building, and he comes in my office, and he closes the door, and like Mickey was talking about, I'm thinking, oh, my God, now what's going to happen? Is he going to talk about his closet in the truck? Does he want me to fire his engineer? Does he not like his crew chief? Is the wrong guy driving his truck? Does he not like his uniform? Is it not pressed right? He says, Mike, I got to tell you something. He said, I discovered something at Daytona. So what's that, Dan? When I left Andretti Racing, I wasn't sure I made the right decision. I won races there. Those guys were great, great guys to race with. I had great teammates there. I miss all of those guys. I could be winning races with those guys right now. You know that. He said, but I knew at 4 o'clock in the morning at Daytona how committed you guys are to winning. I made the right decision. 45 days later, we were at Homestead for the IndyCar race, the opening round of the IndyCar race, and Dan won the race. That was big for Chip Ganassi Racing. That was huge. I don't know, you people that are historians of IndyCar racing will understand that in 2004 and 2005, it was put to us pretty hard. The only races we had an opportunity to win were the short tracks and the road tracks, where horsepower wasn't really important. And Scott Dixon did his fair share to try to prove that point and did that for us. But outside of that, we sucked on the ovals. We were terrible. Dan, I think, felt he took a chance by coming over to us because of that reason. We'd switched partners. We had Honda engines, but we were learning about Delaras. And what we've been doing for 2 years in our building is we'd been pushing our people really, really hard to try to get our cars through the air. That was a big deal for us. Mechanically and aero-wise, we didn't really know if we were on the right track. We thought we were, but we didn't really have a product that could prove it. Dan Wheldon proved that to us right away. He came around in the building and explained to everybody how important it was, what they did. Every person in the building was immediately engaged by Dan Wheldon. He was part of the process from the start. He wasn't one of those guys that just turned up at the racetrack in his jet, had somebody park his car, ate catered food, and left. This guy was in the middle of everything we were doing. He was fantastic. I had never, ever, up to that point in time, been around a guy on an oval that could drive a car like Dan Wheldon. He was magical. He was amazing. He was impressive. Quite frankly, all the guys that went through our driver parade up until Dan Wheldon, when I started working for Chip was in 1992. The first guy I dealt with or worked for, was a chief mechanic for, was a guy named Eddie Cheever. And right after that, a guy came along named Ari Lyondike, and that guy on a big oval was amazing. I hadn't seen anybody on an oval even close to that since Ari was with us. And we had some pretty good guys. But Dan was head and shoulders above all those guys. I'll say this for the people that understand this. Any guy that could go on a racetrack and drive with 100 pounds of left front cross weight and not flinch and come in, if he can't turn the steering wheel to the right at the exit of the corner, is somebody pretty special. The guy was impressive. Scott Dixon thought he was pretty good on ovals. And at the beginning when Dan turned up, Scott and I don't think Scott and Dan were the best of friends. I think they had a tough time with each other. They were trying to grow with each other. They were trying to learn. But what they had in common is they had racing in common. Racing is what drove them together. It created a friendship that is pretty special now. But at the time, they couldn't figure it out. But as the year went on, they started to get together. Everything started to work, and all of a sudden, Scott started, he was looking at the data. He's going, man, I don't really understand how he can do that. I've got to work on that. I think today, Scott Dixon will tell you why he's so good on an oval. At the end of that first season, Wheldon came to me and he said, I got a real problem. I'm thinking, oh, no, what now? He said, Dixon's better than I am on an oval. I said, well, I thought you kept a little bit close to the best. He said, I didn't. I said, well, then you better go back to Dixon because you're going to need some help next year because he's on fire. So those two guys were pretty good together. I brought a prop with me, and I just wanted to bring this up, and it kind of reflects what everybody thinks that we're all about business. We look at the data stream, we do all of these things, we're all business. And we were at Indianapolis, I think it was in 2008, maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8, I don't remember. I should probably write this stuff down for the book. But we'd already qualified. We qualified pretty well, and the difference between Wheldon and Dixon is simply this. Wheldon loved qualifying. He loved going fast. He loved 4 laps at the Speedway more than anybody I've ever met. Those 4 laps to him were awesome. I remember asking him about qualifying one day, and he said to me, let me explain it to you like this. He says, when the car is right across the short chutes, it's like driving on a slick track. Think about that. Like driving on a slick track. He said, you barely hold on to the wheel. You let the car drive across there. The car drives you. You don't drive the car when it's right. He loved qualifying at Indianapolis. It was fun to be around him on that day. And Scott, on the other hand, always was miserable if he didn't qualify well. But Scott loved racing. He loved being ready for the race. He loved working on the car. He loved being out there pounding around, and that's what we've always done with Scott, is get ready to race. So we had a meeting in the morning, I think it was a Tuesday or Wednesday morning of the second week, and we got this big grand plan that we're going to go out at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're going to fill the cars up, and we're going to go out, and we're going to chase each other around the racetrack, and we're going to go through maybe 3 sets of tires or 4 sets of tires if everything worked right, and work on race stuff. So I'm on Dixon's stand, and I'm out there. No Dan. We wait about 15 or 20 minutes, and Dixon says, screw it, let's go. So we're on the racetrack, and he finds Briscoe or Helio or somebody like that to run around with in the first run. We make some changes. No Dan. Make another run. Still no Dan. Finally, about 2:30 in the afternoon, here comes, Dixon finally says on the intercom to us, he says, we might as well go back to the garage. Just as that happens, around a corner comes a golf cart with a 10 car with Wheldon sitting on it. And it was a nice sunny spring day in Indianapolis, probably one of the first days the sun was really out, and this is what we saw. So golf cart pulls up, the guys unhook the car, they're getting ready to go. Dan's in his car's in his box, and Dan comes walking back to Dixon. Puts his head in the cockpit, and this is normally where, like, Vince Welch would be standing there with a microphone, and he'd be saying to the ESPN viewers, well, Dixon and Wheldon, now they're getting ready to run on a racetrack. They're probably talking right now about what they're going to do together when they run, because when you run close at 220 miles an hour, this is precision driving. It has to be right. So we've got, the intercom is still plugged into the car, so we hear this conversation that Vince is talking about. Dan puts his head in the car and he says, hey, bro, how's the car? Dixon says, it's about bloody time you showed up out here. Why does it take them so long back there in the garage for those your guys, to put my setup on your car? He says, Well, I appreciate you running all the setup stuff. It's going to make it a lot easier on me on race day. So Dan steps away from the car, and Dick says, let's go, man. Let's get going. So then Dixon says, oh, Dan, hey, one more thing. I said, what's that? He says, when they make those in men's, I'll have a pair. So you simply think we talk about the cars all the time? We don't. At Las Vegas, I was talking to Dan, and he said to me, hey, I got to come by the building in a couple of weeks. I need my picture taken with a trophy. I said, with what trophy? And he said, with that A.J. Foyt oval trophy, the one that Dixon just got. I said, really? You want a picture with that? He said, yeah. He says, you know, I assume by now Chip's had my name etched on that thing because I'm the reason that Dixon does what he does on ovals now. So we were going to make something up. We talked about it. We may still do that in memory of Dan, because Dan truly is. He's a teammate. He was a friend. He made it happen for us under race situations all the time. You know, we're very fortunate to have had our lives enhanced by Dan Wheldon. He was one of the best things at Chip Ganassi Racing that has ever happened to me. Even better was that Dan didn't let a little thing like moving to another race team get in the way of a good friendship. It actually made us stronger together. You know, wins and championships define us professionally, but the interaction of friendship outlasts it all, and Dan proved that. I've come to the realization how strongly that Dan felt about life. First, he remembered where he came from. Success didn't change him. It really only allowed him to do more for those around him. He reminded us that achievement is best as a shared experience. He taught me that the importance of unselfish support lasts a lifetime, and that's truly what defines friendship. For him, it was the passion of today that counted the most. For him, it wasn't just about what was done on track together. That's only the catalyst. That's the denominator that drove us closer together. It was the rare and special ability that Dan had to love life and to teach us truly that was a shared experience. It made us all better. When my dad died a few years ago, someone very close to me said that you shouldn't place faith in time, as the hands on the clock will soon stand still. In my life, there have only been a few people, and I can count them on one hand, that have accepted each other, that have taken each other with simple acceptance, and that was Dan Wheldon. He's clearly in that circle. His ethic was to live life with the time available and to accept each other at face value. Dan will always be one of those who used every minute to make our world better. In his brief time, Dan achieved what few have ever been able to achieve professionally, but more importantly, personally. He used winning on the racetrack to make a difference, and that's the sheer magnitude of his positive influence for all our lives. Knowing Dan Wheldon made me a better person, and that's the definition of true friendship. I'm going to miss him.
Please welcome Dan's former teammates at Andretti Green Racing, Dario Franchitti, Brian Herta, and Tony Kanaan.
Thanks. These need to go up a bit.
No, it needs to go down. Well, if you're here today, you feel some kind of connection to Dan. You're either a friend or family or a fan, and you know a lot about what kind of guy he was.
And while we've heard so much about what a great guy, great husband, and great father he was, we did not come here today to tell you more about those things. Yes, those things are all true, but to talk only about them would do a disservice to our friend.
We've all been sad for the past 7 days, but Dan gave all of us 33 years of life, 33 years of living, and 33 years of things to remember and to celebrate. If the roles were reversed and Dan was here today to pay tribute to one of us, he would not be here to be sad. He would be here to celebrate life and to make people around him feel better.
And for the time we knew him, Dan celebrated life every day. And we're here today to help you celebrate who he was. So with that, we're going to enter now the no-cry zone. Oh, it's a yellow paper.
Legal paper.
Man, your handwriting is terrible. Bro.
I know. Can I tell you?
Thank God you're a driver. So, go ahead.
Well, first of all, we're all...
we're not wearing this because we're really proud to have...
Of our own achievements. Mm-hmm. These are Dan's championship rings from 2005, and when he won, he was kind enough to give us one. So this is the only time I'll ever wear these. Really, and actually the only time I'll ever wear white shoes like these too. I thought you'd appreciate that. We were, what's the word, lucky enough?
Well, Dan got hired as a backup driver back in the end of 2002. Dario was on vacation in Scotland with Ashley driving all his Ferraris. Brian didn't want to have anything to do with testing, and
It wasn't me yet.
Brian wasn't there yet.
Oh, that's true.
I have Dario's questionable motorbike skills to thank for bringing me into
right.
Dan's life and into the Andretti Green.
It was just the three of us and Michael. And I was under contract to a team, and I couldn't test, so we chose Dan to do it. He did 4,000 miles for us.
Mm-hmm. And then I fell off the bike, and...
Yeah, we were trying to be...
Superman,
and Brian got in anyway, but...
Anyway.
When Dan and TK and Dario and I came together, it completed a puzzle for all of us. And it created, I think, for all of us, the most memorable time in racing and the most fun time. And a lot of that was due to, and some of it was at the expense of Mr. Dan Wheldon.
Well, most of it was at the expense of Dan, to be honest.
And by the way, we didn't want him. He was a brother that we didn't ask for. I mean, a guy that looks better than the three of us.
Younger,
hungry for win.
Won more races. Yeah.
Yes. He was the only one of us. He was the only one of us that looked like he belonged in the boy band.
Well, he was bigger than Beckham. Come on.
Bigger than Beckham. Yeah.
But we had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We had a lot of fun at his expense. Everybody knows what a neat freak Dan was.
Oh, yeah.
At Indianapolis one time, we're getting ready. We're all going to go out together and do a long run together. And Dan's locker, like his closet, was immaculate always.
Well, we have the lockers together, and he made us look like
pigs.
Yeah, and he was misfortunate enough to make some comment about how sloppy our lockers were. So we took it upon ourselves to fix his locker for him. We threw everything out. We threw things up on the roof. We threw things everywhere right before we were going out to run.
And we had to do a long run together, the four of us.
So we were much like Mike was talking about. We were out there waiting. Where's Dan? Well, it turns out Dan was back in the garage and couldn't actually face driving the car before the locker was put back into its pre-pristine stage.
We blame Brian on that.
And our late friend John Anderson went back there, and I believe it went something like, "Hey, Shag, come on, hurry up." And Dan, at that point, was trying to jump up and pull the suit that somebody had put up on the ceiling off so he could get out there. But
he said before his locker wasn't done and he couldn't get his suit out of there, he was not going to jump in the car. So we had to actually come back and kind of help him a bit.
I think the most famous story is probably the Japan one. And because this is an audience of mixed age,
we'll tell half of the story.
We can tell half of the story. We, in 2004, we went to the Motegi race as usual in Japan, and we were bored.
A little bit, time difference, and Dan's first race, and Brian had the brilliant idea to tell me to go to the front desk and pretend that I was Dan Wheldon, which... But thanks for the language barrier. My poor English and the Japanese chick that was in the reception, He gave me his room key.
So we went up there, and we went in his room. I think, had somebody not sent him to the museum?
No, and Brian at the time said, Dan, you should go to the Honda Museum.
It's amazing.
Beautiful.
Spend a lot of time, really look at it carefully. Meanwhile, we were in his room.
So we got the PR person to take him there.
So the first thing we did, all his shoes were laid on the bed, all in shoe bags, laid out. So we took one of each.
The left one. We didn't want to take his throttle shoe.
We went into the bathroom. We took some hair care products.
By the way, he had more hair products than any single girl combined together here.
Unbelievable. We stole his TV because we needed a TV.
We turned the heater on.
Yeah, for another part of the story. But
every light bulb.
Every light bulb off.
And then we left.
No, by the way, we FedEx his shoes back to America.
So
it cost us a lot, but it was fun.
It was worth it, man. So we then go to our rooms. All the rooms were adjoining. And we're sitting there waiting, and it's getting a bit warm because of the heating, and the whole floor was getting warm. Then we hear Dan come up to the door. Click, click. Good. That's exactly what it sounded like. And then you heard...
You can't say
You can't say this, but it was like...
For a while.
He wouldn't speak to us. For how long?
He was running up and down the hallway yelling. We're like little kids hiding in the room laughing, but we're actually afraid to come out of the room. He was so mad. And we had Eddie, I remember looking through the people, and Eddie Cheever and Robert Clark from Honda, all these people were staying on our floor coming out of the rooms to see what the commotion's all about. And he's pounding on our doors, and he was not happy.
He moved rooms.
Yes. And I could never get a key again in that hotel, even with my ID and my own room. Funny story, we start racing in Miami, and obviously the past 9 years we raced at Homestead, and then every time we raced in Miami, he stayed in my house.
When he came to LA, he'd stay with.
Drove all my cars. Never thanked me.
Stole your watch.
Stole one of my watches, which he was wearing in one of those pictures. Susie, we'll talk. And then we announced that we're going to race in St. Pete. So we all assume we have a place to stay. Well, for the past 9 years, I've never slept in Dan's house.
No.
Because he didn't want to actually get his rooms messed up.
No, he didn't want us to mess up his room. As a matter of fact, when I did go to visit, I remember I used the washroom, and he made sure to tell me to wipe the sink down with the towel after I finished.
By the way, before you get to his house, you better take your shoes off or you're not getting in. So anyway, I never slept there, never drove any one of his cars, but that was Dan.
That was Dan. We were talking about his style earlier, but when we were down in St. Pete this week, it was good to have everybody together, and we're telling some stories, and the one that did come up a lot was his questionable style. I mean, without doubt, the tightest race suit I've ever seen. I don't know, has anybody here seen any driver with a tighter race suit than Dan? I'm surprised he fathered 2 kids, to be honest. Show the impression.
Should we do the impression?
The best part was when Dan would, and he was on the podium frequently in his tight race suit. It was not made for hoisting a trophy overhead. And if you look at some of the pictures, this actually would happen to him. This would be Dan raising a trophy on the podium. And believe me, we never missed an opportunity to remind him of that, or his $1 million smile. The guy was trying to make up for an entire country's worth of bad dental work in 1 mouth.
I mean, the guy that he went and probably talked to Susie about who was the best dentist in St. Pete to make sure he had the biggest, brightest smile on earth. Well,
that's the old one.
That's the old one because we asked.
Before.
And he did it.
He is the only guy. A lot of people have won the Indianapolis 500 more than once, but he is the only guy to be on the Borg Warner Trophy with 2 different sets of teeth.
Should we close?
Yeah.
So as you can tell, we love Dan a lot, and we used to play a lot of jokes on him.
You don't have to go close.
I will. I do, but I speak quietly. But thank you.
I can't anyway.
We used to think Dan was really, really high maintenance. And then we got Marco as a teammate.
So Dan actually wasn't even close. So, M.A., you beat that one big time.
Yeah, I remember one time because we used to tease him a lot. He was always on edge, and I let it be known that I got a key to his house in Indianapolis. It was during the month of May, during a practice day. I don't remember how Dan did it, but he managed to find a locksmith from the Speedway who went to his house that day and changed all the locks on his house. He was so proud of himself that he foiled my plan. He came up to me at the end of the day and said, "No worries, Goose, I changed all the locks on my house." I had a big smile. I looked at him. I said, "I never really had a key."
Well, make no mistake, guys. I'm not making fun of my friend. I laughed at him and with him over the years because I love him. And he did the same with me. I love him like a brother. And like all brothers, there were times that we called each other names. We gave each other the finger in the 500 this year. But I explained that not to make him look bad. He was waving and it was too windy and he missed 4 at a time. And we had agreed to disagree. But our friendship was bigger than all of that. And like you guys, I'm grateful for the time we got to spend with him on Earth. And although that bit of time is done, our time together, it's not over. We have our memories, we have our feelings, and one day we'll be together again. It's not for that reason that it's for that reason that I'm not saying goodbye to Dan. Not today and not ever. Goodbye is final, and our friendship won't end. So for now, I'll simply say, I'll see you later. I love you, my good friend.
Yeah. Like many others sharing their thoughts today, I was privileged to spend a lot of time with Dan, especially over the last 6 months. From working together at the Indianapolis 500 to also tagging along with some of his media appearances after the race, and then working so much on the development of this 2012 Dallara Indy car. Those experiences made us even closer, and I'm so grateful for that time together. And in that time, Dan retained that trademark $1 million smile, that energy that seemed to fill any room he stepped into, and his playful way of pushing everyone around him to meet the same impossibly high standards he set for himself. But there was something different, too. He had blossomed into this incredible person that was so giving of his time and experience, clearly fulfilled and happy in his personal life, often telling stories about his boys and Susie to his friends at the track. He had become complete, and his happiness spilled over into everything and everyone he touched. Dan would have been incredibly appreciative and humbled by the tremendous outpouring of love and support from his friends and fans. I know that has been a source of strength for Dan's entire family, and I want to thank everyone who has remembered Dan's loved ones this week. I'd also like to ask that we continue to do so. Dan's legend on and off the track lives on in each one of us, and we should continue to honor him and remember his legacy. So many of you have shared stories of your time with Dan, and it has been amazing to learn just how many people Dan connected to over his life. His ability to spend just a few minutes with someone, but find a way to make that time special and meaningful, is the example from Dan I most hope to be able to follow. I'll leave you with one little story that was shared through Facebook just a couple days ago. There's a family of 4 attending the Las Vegas race that waited patiently outside Dan's hauler for 30 minutes, just hoping for a chance to meet him and maybe catch a quick autograph. As Dan emerged from the trailer, he was rushing over to make it out for driver intros, but he still graciously stopped and talked briefly with the family. He even posed for a couple pictures and signed a couple autographs. The family was thrilled to meet their hero, and as Dan walked away, he stopped and turned back to the family and said, "Thank you for coming out. I appreciate it." In that moment, Dan made the entire family fans for life, and not for the short time he had left with us, but their entire lives. God bless you, Danny, and thank you. We all appreciate it.
I will say Dan would be so proud of this turnout today. He'd be like, I told you, bro, I'm big in Indy. I told you. He was big everywhere. It's about awesome. At first, Dan was really nice. He was pretty much the little brother we didn't want. And now, we would do anything to have him back. We'll miss you, D-Dub. Thank you.
The drivers paying one last tribute to the great Dan Wheldon.
This is a time for these men and women who pilot these race cars to be with their families and to embrace what Dan Wheldon meant and what Dan Wheldon would want. And I think it's fitting that we honor that.
First of all, I want to thank everyone who had a voice in allowing me to be a part of this service here today. I'm also very proud to say that Dan was a friend of mine. Now, he wasn't my best friend, and I know that I wasn't his best friend. But if you ever had the opportunity to speak with Dan for any length of time on any subject, he had a special way of making you feel like that he was your best friend.
Sometimes looking for the right words is just a matter of remembering history. To borrow the words of one of my broadcasting heroes, Sid Collins, who talked about the death of Eddie Sachs in the 1964 Indianapolis 500. We are all speeding toward death at the rate of 60 minutes every hour. The only difference is we do not know how to speed faster. Dan Wheldon did. So since death has more than 1,000 doors, Dan exits this earth in a race car. The poet Byron said, "Who the gods love, die young."
Yesterday, there was a memorial service in Dan's adopted hometown of St. Petersburg, Florida. His father and brothers and sister recorded a message that they want to play for everyone now.
Hi, I'd like to just say my name's Clive Wheldon. I'm Dan was my son, who, as you know, was very special to us. This is my family. Holly on my left, Elliot on my right, Austin on my left behind, and Ashley. And what we do, we'd just like to say to everyone the support they've given to Dan over the years. He loved you guys, and it was always a pleasure watching him race. And I'd just like to say a special thank you to everyone who supported him. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
always found that this song is most healing when everyone sings it together. So if your heart moves you to sing, please know that your voice is more than welcome. Looking back on the memory of the dance we shared beneath the stars above, and for a moment all the world was right, but how could I have known that you'd ever say goodbye? And now that I didn't know the way it all would end, the way it all would go, our lives are better left to chance. I could have missed the pain, but I'd have had to miss the day. Holding you, I held everything. For a moment, wasn't I the key? But if I'd only known how the king would fall, hey, who's to say? You know, I might have changed it all. And now that I didn't know the way it all would end, the way it all would go, our lives are better left to chance. I could have missed the pain, but I'd have had to miss the dance. Yes, my life, it's better left to chance. I could have missed the pain, but I'd have had to miss the